we had a couple of child labor cases that we brought criminal charges in. One of them was a teenager and his arm was severed when he was working on machinery that kids are not allowed to use.
Terri Gerstein, she is the director of the State and Local Enforcement Project at the Harvard Law School Labor and Work-Life program. Previously, she worked for over 17 years enforcing labor laws in New York State, including as the Labor Bureau Chief for the New York State Attorney General's Office and as a Deputy Commissioner in the New York State Department of Labor. That's our kind of law enforcement officer. Terri, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, before we get into the meat of why we brought you here today, reading your bio yesterday made me think of something. We've had this big issue, and I'm not sure how closely you've been following it, but with child labor in the state of Alabama recently at Hyundai facilities. And our Attorney General hasn't said anything at all about it since it was made public in July. And actually, he has known about it since local police informed him back in February. So our Attorney General has been aware of preteens working in Hyundai facilities and Hyundai manufacturing facilities with amputation hazards, with OSHA violations for amputation hazards in this state. And he hasn't said anything about it. Just to be fair, in their press releases regarding the civil penalties that are being levied against these companies, against the Hyundai suppliers, both the Alabama Department of Labor and the U.S. Department of Labor, they have mentioned the Attorney General's office as people that supported their investigation. But if that is even the case, the Attorney General's office don't seem proud of it. They haven't issued a press release about it. They haven't, the guy hasn't so much as tweeted about it, right? But they've constructed this entire apparatus on their website where you can, complain if you get censored on Twitter or whatever. And so, I've been saying this whole time that the AG should be more proactive in protecting children and workers from exploitative bosses. But I met with total disinterest from conservative folk on the radio, conservative politicians, or even them basically saying that, oh, that's not the Attorney General's job, that's the Department of Labor's job. And we saw that they've gotten civil violations and civil penalties, and they're going to have to pay a fine. And so there we go. That's the extent of the thing. What do you think? As somebody who's actually worked as a labor law enforcer for the New York Attorney General, what do you think that a properly motivated Attorney General could be doing in this situation?
Well, AG's powers vary a lot from state to state. Their jurisdiction varies, their resources vary, but absolutely an AG's office could certainly speak out. Every single AG has soft powers. They have a really very high profile position of public leadership, and every single AG, regardless of their jurisdiction, has the ability to speak out, to write op-eds, to look at their statutes and see what kind of jurisdiction they might have. Do they have criminal authority? Do they have, are there ways that they could bring a case? I would say, just to give a few examples, there are other AG's offices that have been very active in pursuing child labor violations. When I was at the New York AG's office, we had a couple of child labor cases that we brought criminal charges in. One of them was a teenager who was working at a restaurant upstate. He was 17 years old and his arm was severed when he was working on machinery that kids are not allowed to use. And we ended up bringing criminal charges in that case. We also had another case that was really tragic where a 14-year-old kid working on a farm was killed operating machinery that kids that age are prohibited from being able to operate. And so these are starkly serious kinds of conditions, and kids are extremely vulnerable at workplaces. And, I don't know in depth all of the exact powers of the AGs in every single state. So I don't know what they necessarily, what the AG necessarily could have done, but certainly an AG who cared about protecting children and who cared about protecting workers would speak out about it and would be scouring the statutes for any opportunity to take action. And I would add as well that this whole issue of child labor, a number of AGs have also brought cases involving child labor just in fast food restaurants, having kids work extremely long hours.
Mm.
The DC AG's office and I think the DC AG's office, the New Jersey AG's office recently had a case involving Chipotle and they got $7 million or so in penalties. The Mass AG's office has done a lot of cases involving kids that are expected to work extremely long hours. The Washington AG's office as well. And so, it's interesting. We have this labor shortage and turning to, I mean, it's just horrifying that companies are turning to minors and breaking child labor laws, whether the ones that, just protect children's time and make sure that they get enough rest and have healthy lives and are able to learn and go to school and are not overworked when they're so young, to these laws protecting their life and limb from doing hazardous work. These are people are surprised to learn this, but child labor is still a persistent problem in our country.
Right, right. So when I asked the Alabama Attorney General's office, they said that regarding the matter of potential law violations as a law enforcement agency, it's the longstanding policy of the Alabama Attorney General's office not to comment on the possibility of criminal investigations. And so that's what they're saying, why they haven't commented on it. But they have come out and made public statements saying that they would criminally prosecute doctors at the Alabama Veterans Affairs Hospitals if they gave life-saving abortions to patients in violation of our abortion ban. So, I don't know how doggedly they maintain that policy. But I think that you're right. They could at least be talking about this as an issue and be using their bully pulpit, so to speak, issuing press releases and condemning Hyundai. And like I said, not so much as a tweet about this from the Attorney General.
Right. I mean, I will say, having worked in government, that there are times when government agencies are doing things, and especially with criminal cases, that they really can be doing a lot of work behind the scenes that you don't know about. Mm-hmm. So I will say that, and sort of talking publicly about a particular investigation is different than talking generally about like a field of different types of cases. But if there's no indication of involvement or interest in this issue in the past, that's obviously a really, and no sort of public, expressions of concern, that's obviously really, really concerning. And I would note also, it's really in contrast, not just with the AGs that I've mentioned who've done work on child labor issues, but state attorneys general throughout the country have been increasingly getting involved and protecting workers' rights. And there's been really a surge in activity in that area, from suing Uber and Lyft and Shipt for treating workers as independent businesses instead of as employees with all of the rights that employees have, to suing Amazon for really unsafe working conditions, both related to the pandemic and also related to ergonomic and like longstanding injuries, to just like run of the mill everyday wage theft cases. There are now about 9 or 10 AG's offices that have dedicated worker protection units that have staff that are full-time focused on protecting workers' rights. And as I wrote about in a recent New York Times op-ed that I wrote, Republican AGs, meanwhile, are suing to stop a pay raise for employees of federal contractors that was part of President Biden's executive order and administrative action. So you have, one set of AGs that are fighting wage theft and fighting workplace dangers, and then the Republicans are trying to prevent people from getting a raise. So it just feels very stark. So without, the details of this particular child labor case, I would hope that they're getting involved because these facts are really extreme and egregious and outlying. And I would hope that any government agency in any state that is focused on protecting children or protecting workers or just protecting the public broadly would be looking for any opportunity to have an impact in this situation. But separate and apart from this particular case, just more broadly, there is so much opportunity for state AGs and for state and local government officials to be protecting workers, passing laws, enforcing workers' rights, getting people paid sick leave, so many things. And we really don't see a lot of that from the Republican side.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.